I'm the Counsel General's policy advisor. I mean, that probably doesn't mean a great deal outside of government. Doesn't mean probably too much inside government. But one of the things in my area of responsibility is to be the programme manager for the Counsel General's programme to improve accessibility. And this was something that Dylan touched upon yesterday in his opening remarks. And he said a key part of that programme was consolidation. I think he also said it was quite a traditional approach, one that took a long time to see results. So James, I was thinking, given you've just finished working on one consolidation bill and are now deep in a second one, I thought perhaps we could talk about what consolidation means to us within Welsh Government.
Absolutely, be delighted to talk about what we've been doing. But as you said, of course, the consolidation work fits within a wider programme of work that is going on to try and improve the accessibility of the law in Wales. So I wondered if maybe you could start with a little introduction or overview of the other work that's going on and of the context that consolidation fits into.
Yeah, happy to do that. Well, we've got legislative and non-legislative projects within the programme. Perhaps we can talk about some of those legislative projects in a bit. Some of the other projects, they kind of focus on communicating the law that it already exists. So we've got quite a traditional model of a website. People can find that at Cyfraith Cymru or Law Wales. And that sort of explains and provides information about the law and the constitution in Wales, gives links to the legislation itself. That legislation is hosted on legislation.gov.uk, and we've just heard Catherine talking about some of the amazing data that underpins that site. And we're working with some of Catherine's colleagues on annotation. So Catherine talked about applying effects and showing the legislation as amended. And TNA have done some amazing work on bringing the English text of legislation up to date. But of course, our legislation is made bilingually, and the Welsh language text is not up to date. So people within Welsh Government are now working with TNA to ensure the Welsh language texts are going to start to be brought up to date. I think we're also quite keen, picking up on Paul's question conversation earlier, and Natalie's question earlier. I think we're keen to be part of that cohort of people that work with TNA to look at developing the functionality on the site, perhaps to be able to search Welsh law by subject. So you don't have to know the exact item of legislation. You can find the area that you're interested in, work from there. And one of the projects in the programme is looking at new technologies and potentially new projects we can support accessibility with. That's why I'm looking forward to the hackathon really over the next couple of days. But perhaps back to consolidation, that's what we're here to talk about. Tell me, James, how does that contribute to improving accessibility?
Well, I suppose I should start with what the problem is that we're trying to address in consolidations, which is, I suppose, that the UK Parliament and the Senedd in Wales are constantly legislating and the law is changing. And the result of that is that the law gets into a mess, really. So we end up with multiple acts on the same topic. So the law is scattered over different acts that have been passed at different times, written by different people. Some of them may be very old and have very old-fashioned language in them that doesn't reflect how legislation is written today. In Wales, we have the problem that a lot of the legislation we're dealing with, particularly if it's from before the existence of the Senedd, is legislation that may apply to England as well as Wales, and it may even also apply to Scotland or Northern Ireland. So it will have material in there that is not relevant to Wales. It's dealing with issues that only arise in other countries. And then sometimes legislation is changed in ways that aren't obvious on the text. Sometimes the law will be changed and it'll affect a piece of legislation without changing its text. So, for example, when the National Assembly for Wales was renamed as the Senedd, there's a general provision in an act that says references to the Assembly should be read as meaning the Senedd, but we didn't go through every single act that referred to them and change the words sort of manually, as it were, in each place. So often you're reading legislation and you need to know that there are other things elsewhere that affect what it means. That's particularly been an issue with devolution. That's how pretty much all of devolution has been done. So lots of legislation looks as though it's talking about the pre-devolution world, and it's actually now has to be read differently. It might help if I just show quickly an example of something like that. So this is, I hope people can see this, and I'm not expecting people to read this in any detail, but this is one of the first sections that we've been consolidating in the historic environment bill we're doing at the moment. And if I just scroll down, you can see this is one section of an act, and it's got over 1,000 words of text here and a huge long list of textual amendments that have been made, which are shown by all these square bracketed things that you can see on the screen. So this is a provision about scheduling historic monuments. And there's lots of problems when you come to try and read this. First of all, it applies to the whole of Great Britain, but you can't tell that from the section itself. You've got to look at something at the end of the Act. It starts off by talking about the Secretary of State, which is a UK government minister, but in Wales, because of what I was saying about how devolution has been done, that now doesn't mean the Secretary of State, it actually means the Welsh ministers. You can see also, if you can see the text, maybe zoom in a bit, you can see there are various references to Historic Environment Scotland because it's been amended for Scotland. So this is what legislation.gov.uk have done to try and sort of show the amendments that have been made. But the problem here is we've got sort of parallel text. So there's one section of an act, but actually it says different things in Scotland and England and Wales. And if you look further down, there are some provisions that are only about England. There are some that we've added in an act of ours that only applies in Wales. Essentially, it's a horrendous mess. It's really hard to make sense of what is going on there. So that's why we need to do consolidation, really.
You're right. It looks absolutely horrific. So what would consolidation deliver for me? How would it look?
Well, consolidation, I suppose I should say for us, when we talk about consolidation, we're talking about producing a new act, a new piece of legislation which restates the existing law in a better form, we hope. So I know some people have used the word consolidation to mean other things, sort of publishing up-to-date versions. I mean, we don't need to do that, fortunately, because legislation.gov.uk do that for us, as in the version I've just shown you. But what we do in a consolidation is try and bring together in a new act material that, as I said, may be scattered across a variety of different acts at the moment. We try and, where possible, update the language to reflect the law and update the sort of what the provisions say to make sure they reflect any legal changes that have happened that need to be incorporated, try and make things more consistent. And in Wales, as you just saw from that section, there was actually loads of material there that was not relevant to us. So it means extracting what's relevant to Wales and leaving out what isn't. And of course, because we're a bilingual jurisdiction, it means producing a text of the new provisions in English as well as Welsh. So I could just very quickly again show you.
Oh, okay. Yep.
What we've
show me the new and improved version.
What we've done with that, and this is not to sort of say that this is necessarily perfect, but this is what we thought we needed from that enormous section that I just showed you. So we have actually two sections. There's one there about this publishing this schedule of monuments, and then a second section about telling people if you change it. But from that 1,000 or so words that were there in the original section, we've ended up with 300 and something words because there was so much that was not relevant to us, and some bits that actually were no longer needed because they were about things that happened in the past and so on. So, we've produced something that is briefer and we hope clearer. So yeah, I think the intention is that we try and produce a more modern piece of legislation that only contains the stuff we need and does it in something that looks more like a modern act.
Okay. I mean, you've just mentioned that, we've heard the term consolidation a couple of times today and indeed yesterday, slightly different context though. So does the type of consolidation you're talking about happen in other jurisdictions?
It does, and it's happened in the UK for a long time. And actually I was checking, and we don't normally say in our consolidation acts, we don't call them a consolidation act in the title, but that used to be the practice. There are acts called the such and such Consolidation Act going back to the 19th century and perhaps even longer. And it's something that the Law Commission has had as one of its responsibilities since it was set up in the 1960s. And in fact, a lot of this legislation that we're now looking at consolidating in the bills we're working on is stuff that's been consolidated once or even a number of times in the past. So some of these provisions have their origins in the 19th century or in the 1940s or what have you. So that there has been a lot of consolidation. The UK Parliament did a lot of it, particularly sort of in the 1980s and 1990s. There's been a lot less of it recently. So apart from a huge consolidation of sentencing law for England and Wales that was done in 2020, I think there's only been one other Consolidation Act at Westminster in the last decade or so. And in Scotland, they've done, I think Scottish Parliament's done one or two as well, but it's certainly been there's been a lot less of it recently. And in terms of what's done, I think there's sort of been some variation in the extent to which things are changed in a consolidation. Those bills all go through a sort of truncated procedure that involves less scrutiny, so they're not meant to change the law. But certainly in Westminster, they have a number of different procedures that can be used depending on whether it's a pure consolidation, which it's not quite just a sort of cut and paste of the existing legislation, but it's just sort of intended to collect stuff together in one place, as opposed to other consolidations where there may be changes to try and fix sort of obvious problems in the law, so long as there's, they're not doing anything contentious. I think our approach and what we've got in our standing orders in the Senedd is more along the sort of latter lines of a consolidation with some amendments. So we have in our bills we're working on made quite a few changes, but they're mostly very minor things of leaving out provisions that we think are no longer required, making things consistent where we can't see reasons why they should be different, that kind of thing.
So the benefits then are to bring it together in a single place, to modernise its form, its structure, its language, to remove ambiguities and inconsistencies. I mean, it sounds great. Why aren't we all doing this? Why haven't we been doing this before? Well,
I think that links to things that were said yesterday by Dylan at the very outset and by a number of the other speakers. It's time consuming. There's, I think, concerns about the amount of care you need to take to do the work to make sure you're not accidentally changing things. But yeah, I mean, producing a new version of the law, even if it's still, something that still is an act in the same way as what you started with, is a very labor intensive job. So, you're trying to produce a simplified text, but one that still does the same thing. Obviously for us, we're having to produce a version in Welsh as well as English. So there's a lot of work, a lot of checking involved in making sure that you're doing that right. So on this historic environment bill that I just showed you a little extract from, it took well over 18 months for us to produce that bill, to get it introduced. And that's work for the drafters producing the text in English and translators producing the Welsh text, and then the work of checking that the two are the same, and a lot of work for the lawyers who deal with that subject area and the policy officials to answer all the questions we had about, well, do we still need to keep this provision? Does this work? Does it really work in the way that it says? Because it seems quite strange. So there was a lot of just digging into actually how all this legislation works so that we could produce something that we were happy was still doing the same thing without accidentally changing anything.
So I can see why, essentially you're creating an act. It's Dylan describes it as the orthodox, the traditional way of approaching these things. And, you've been in the thick of historic environment. You're now deep into our next bill. And you've talked about some of these complexities and difficulties and the life of a drafter, if I can put it that way. So given we're in a conference talking about new technologies, could technology help us with this?
I'm sure it could. I think, to be honest, we probably haven't thought about it as much as we should. I think there's probably basic-ish sort of technical things that technology could help us with, because a lot of the work is about making the language simpler, removing inconsistencies and so on. And I think there's probably things we could look at there about technology could help with highlighting inconsistencies and archaic language and so on, and maybe help us check whether we really are simplifying things. But I suppose there are parallels between what we're doing in trying to create a new version of the law and some of the types of projects people were talking about yesterday, where you're looking at ways of translating legislative words into code or into software, into systems that people can use to do things. I suppose we are in a way doing a similar sort of translation from the old words and the old structure of the legislation to something new. And obviously in our case we're doing the sort of translation from one language to another, because most of the old legislation will only be in English, so there won't be a Welsh version until we produce one. So yeah, that's I think there are sort of parallels there. And I suppose there's questions as well, aren't there, about the extent to which different activities sort of complement one another, or whether you need to do all of them. If you're, consolidating the law serves one purpose for the people who actually read the legislation, producing a simpler version, we hope. But other things of, let's say, trying to produce software or code from legislation may be more useful for other users who interact with it in different ways. So, perhaps consolidation and other activities like that are sort of different strands of the sort of whole project of accessibility. Or perhaps you, depending on who you're trying to get to, you don't need to do all of them, but I suppose it depends what the problems are with how your legislation is working and being used at the moment.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there. I mean, you never know, there might be a solution or the start of a solution already percolating away in the minds of our colleagues. And I know, one of the things you do within Welsh Government is to lead on guidance and other tools to support and improve the drafting process. So just coming out of consolidation a bit, anything from what you've heard over the last day and a half that's interested you, or anything you're thinking about what the next few days might deliver?
Well, it's all been very interesting. I think as somebody whose job is kind of to produce the words on the page in the legislative text, I was interested in what Megan Marr was saying yesterday, and partly the reminder that that text that we produce is not the totality of the law. And I think as the Legislative Counsel, we maybe we focus on those words, but we do need to remember that there are other things that go on, whether it's the fact that there's case law out there, the fact that obviously in our case we have two language versions of a piece of legislation. If they don't match, one of them is going to not be the law. And there may be this idea that maybe the rules exist somewhere above or apart from the words you use to express them is I think an interesting idea. I was also interested in what you said about the idea that people say it's the language of legislation that causes them problems rather than necessarily the concepts, which goes to what Paul was just saying about how do we know that we're actually writing things that people can understand even when we think we're trying to do that. So yeah, I mean, which links back to also what Dylan said yesterday about people just don't necessarily know how legislation is put together, and we need to think about how we help our human readers, and perhaps whether technology can help us to make things easier for those readers as well. Yeah. So what about you? Are there things that you're hearing more about?
And what you're saying chimes with me, really, because much as I love working on bills, I mean that's what I've done for most of my time with Welsh Government. I'm really interested in helping people find legislation. So some of what Catherine was saying goes to that. I mean, so it's not about the process of lawmaking, demystifying that, as important as it is, and it's not really about the navigating your way around. It's how do we help people find the legislation they need and then answer the question, answer the problem that they have with it. I've seen some stuff about chatbots. Kate and I have talked about chatbots in the past. Maybe that's something worth investigating. But I think coming into this conference, and perhaps even more so having been in this conference, I'm so aware that I know so little about possible technological solutions that I think my my current thinking might be slightly constrained. So I really would like to see over the next couple of days people spotting a problem, perhaps one we already know about, and giving me a completely fresh way of thinking about it. I don't know what I don't know. So it'd be really, that's kind of what I hope for over the next couple of days, really. Yeah, definitely.
I think I feel the same, really, that there's probably other ideas out there that we just don't know quite what they might be.
Well,
that's
Grant and Ari are going to talk in a minute, aren't they,
yes.
about that kind of point as well. So yeah. But Kate, I don't know if anybody else has any other questions. James, unless there was anything you wanted else to add.
No, I think we've covered what we were going to say, haven't we? But very happy to take any questions anybody has.
Well, I'll just start off by saying thank you both for speaking. It's always interesting to see both a policy perspective and a drafting perspective. We've probably got time for a couple of questions, so I'll let anybody feel free to pop online. Annie, your hand just shot straight up there, so if you want to crack on.
Yeah, of course. So firstly, thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to speak to us. It's obviously a very interesting and important topic, and it's one of those, as you kind of mentioned, Claire, when you start to think about it, you think, oh, why haven't we done this before? So I guess as I was sort of looking through the wider sort of Future of Welsh Law programme, there are obviously a lot of plans in place to improve digital accessibility to legislation, sort of in a wider sense, over the next few years. So how do these sort of wider plans compare to the state of digital accessibility of legislation in the rest of the UK, would you say?
Oh, I'll share that question with James, if I may. But I think all of the 4 nations in the UK are keen to improve accessibility, and we are very lucky to have in that work the partnership with the TNA and the work of the legislation.gov.uk. When you listen to some of the other speakers and the work that they do, and I was at a conference last week when the legislative database of St Helena was being shown to us, for example, I realise how lucky we are to have a free to access digital service. And I don't want to comment really on what progress the UK government or the executive of Northern Ireland are making. That we've each got our own plans and efforts. What I think we are all trying to do, though, is think about accessibility in a range of ways, and all trying to tackle this problem that there's so much out there spread about in so many different forms that we've got to do better for people. It comes down to a sort of social justice argument for me, people needing to understand their rights and responsibilities to be able to enjoy and exercise those. So I think we're all trying to do the same thing in slightly different ways. But I don't know, James, do you have any observations on that?
Well, I'd agree. I think that we're probably all trying to do the same kinds of things, and certainly talking to drafters in the other administrations, I think everybody shares the same concern, the kind of concern that Paul was expressing earlier about how do we make our legislation clear, and also the sort of how we make it accessible digitally. And I suppose some of the things that are done in one place are then looked at by the others, aren't they? And so, for example, DEFRALEX is something that we've been looking at as something that we are interested in doing, something similar for the devolved legislation we're responsible for. So I think, in some ways, maybe having a number of governments is helpful in that different places can try things out and they can be, a model for others to follow if they think they work.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I might just go ahead and ask a question of my own, as nobody else's hand is shooting up. You mentioned that you've completed your first consolidation project. Have you had any feedback on that bill?
Well, the bill, the first one has been introduced in the Senedd, so we haven't yet got much feedback from the Senedd itself, although the committee that are looking at it, several members have said they're very excited about this. So it does seem to be very much welcomed. And to be honest, it's something that people have been looking forward to and calling for quite a while. So this the Historic Environment Bill follows a reform bill in that area that was done about 6 years ago. And I think at the time there were a number of people saying, oh, the laws in this area is a mess. It'd be really good if you could consolidate it. So, you know, it's something that people outside government are definitely keen to see as well. And the one we're working on next is planning law. And again, the Law Commission have looked at that area for us. There's been lots of very positive feedback about the idea of doing it. So I think people are keen. I think people who've looked at the Historic Environment Bill, who are in that field, who are both within the Welsh Government and outside, people that it's been shared with, have all said they think it's clearer and better and easier to read. So that's encouraging that people want to see it.
Perfect, thanks a lot. So Catherine mentioned that in the entire database, it stretches back to sort of the late 13th century. How far back did you guys have to go with the historic environment?
It felt we went back that far at points. But James, you brought together 5 different acts, was it? 5 main acts?
Yeah, we've got material that goes back to 1953, I think is the earliest act that we're consolidating. But although even that's a little bit misleading, because I think one of the things that we found doing this exercise is that because you've got material that's been consolidated before and actually originates in the 19th century, some of it, we found ourselves having to look back through previous consolidations and occasionally it turns out something went slightly wrong on a previous occasion when it was consolidated. So we've found things that we've been a bit puzzled by, and actually it seems like, you know, something went wrong at some point when something was amended or consolidated, and there's a few places where we've taken the opportunity to fix things like that. So it's quite a sort of lot of historical investigation comes into it, perhaps more than you might expect.
Fascinating. Well, I'll just ask again on the floor if anybody else has a last question for Claire and James, and it doesn't look like anybody does. So I'll just say thank you once again for you two coming along and speaking. It's very kind of you, and a really good conversation between 2 people within government.